Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the October installment of the Water Quality Advisory Workgroup meeting being sponsored by the TCEQ Water Quality Division. My name is Greg Easley, and I manage the Water Quality Assessment section of the division here at the TCEQ, and I'll be your moderator for this afternoon's meeting. Before I introduce the presenters that are going to be giving updates at this afternoon's meeting, I wanted to first call your attention to a link in the chat box, or maybe it's called the Q&A box, that you can click on to register your attendance for today's meeting with us, and we would greatly appreciate it if you could do that for us so we know who's with us. And so with that, I would like to introduce who is going to be presenting topics at today's meeting. First, we have Earl Lott, the Director of the Office of Water, Robert Sadler, the Deputy Director of the Water Quality Division, Mike Lindner, Team Leader of the Industrial Permits Team, Paul Broshai, Engineer in our Plans and Specifications Review Group, Rebecca Villalba, Team Leader of the Stormwater Team, Jacinto or Preet Singh, Permit Coordinator on the Industrial Permits Team, Michaela Coleman, a Permit Coordinator on the Stormwater Team, and lastly, Maria Benitez on the Pretreatment Team. And before we get into today's update items, I also wanted to mention that the question and answer portion of the meeting is scheduled near the end of, we're at the end of all the presentations that we'll be giving today. And like we've done it previously in our virtual meetings, we're asking you to, if you have a question, to go ahead and type that into the Q&A box at any time during the meeting when the thought occurs to you to ask something. And along with your question, I would also like to request that you type in the name of the person that you would like to answer or address the question, and that would help us to get it to the right person. So we appreciate that. And let's see if there's any other announcements I need to make. I think that's pretty much it. So I think we'll go ahead and get started with our agenda items. First off, we're going to have several wastewater permitting process updates. And to start us off, I'm going to turn it over to Earl Lott.
Thank you very much, Greg. And good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to start off by saying what an honor it is to attend y'all's water quality advisory meeting. I think this is my first one since I've been in this role, and you know, I'm excited about being here. Just to do a little brief introduction, I'm sure we don't have cameras on everyone right now, but I'm sure that I know a lot of people in this advisory group meeting because a little background on me, I've been with the agency over 27 years, and you know, I got my start in water quality division way back there, so I'm pretty familiar with the water quality program. Out of all the water programs, I think my background was the strongest in water quality. So you know, it's an honor to be back here in this role. For the last 13 years, I served as the director of the Waste Permits Division. So kind of earned my stripes in that program, which is pretty controversial. But anyway, so glad to be here. Wanted to kind of talk to you about some things that we've got going on. And, you know, one of the first things that I did when I took this role is, you know, I started looking at all of our business processes. And I'll just tell everyone on this call that that's kind of my specialty. It has been for the last 20 years, is working on streamlining processes and efficiencies in state government. And I'm just going to share a little bit of background on that. You know, I had mentioned the last 13 years I served as director of the Waste Permits Division. And for those of y'all that don't know, that's permitting of landfills and, you know, industrial waste landfills, municipal landfills, medical waste facilities, really all the stuff that no one wants. They're highly controversial, you know, and they're pretty complex applications. The volume in comparison to the water quality permitting load is probably a quarter of the number of applications that we receive in water quality, but they are very controversial, as you can imagine. And the volume of material that we review is tremendous. And I'm just kind of leading up to this because, you know, I have represented the agency in many hearings when I was in waste, and one of the hearings was about just the permitting efficiency and the use of state dollars that go into reviewing these applications. And I was presenting in front of the House Environmental Reg Committee, and one of the members asked me a question, said, Mr. Lott, is it true that, and it was all talking about efficiencies and how much time my staff was spending on reviewing applications. And the representative asked, Mr. Lott, is it true that your staff spent over 1,300 staff hours working on an application, and you submitted numerous notices of deficiencies to the applicant trying to correct that application? And I answered the question, yes, that is correct, because our role is to try to get these facilities permitted and get the applications right. And the representative turned to the committee members and said, I rest my case. I think this is a classic example of a waste of state resources right here. Mr. Lott just testified that he spent over 1,300 of his staff hours working on an application only to return it in the end because the applicant was unable to provide sufficient information to get this application through the process. So that hearing right there changed my entire mindset. And, you know, at that point, I started coming up with reasons on, or I guess positions and things we can do to make sure that we get these applications out. And from that day on, it was my mission to make sure that we were operating as efficiently as possible. And I can tell you in waste, when I left that program area, we had implemented a process called Lean, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later in my discussion with you. But Lean is a process that was adopted in the automotive industry, and then it moved over into government a few years back. I adopted Lean concepts in waste permits, and we significantly reduced that permitting time frame. Because one of the things I did not like about waste permit timeframes is on the municipal waste permits, the time frame for issuance was 350 days. That's our internal time frames. And then on the industrial side, it was 450. And anything over a year, it doesn't sit well with me. So the first thing we did when we implemented this is we did a deep dive into the process. I worked with staff to overturn every rock in that process and look for efficiencies. And I don't care if it was something as simple as how we correspond by mail. You know, we looked at that and said, hey, if there's a way to save a few days there, we're going to do it. And we implemented that process. And the goal I set out at the very beginning of that was this process is 350 days long right now and 450 on one site. I want those cut in half. And staff looked at me like I was completely insane. You know, we kept working at it for months and months. And eventually we got there. We didn't quite meet the halfway mark, but we did get well below 350 days on all permit applications. And that's the way it's operating now in that program. You know, I was happy to see that success. And one of the first things I did when I came over to water, and like I mentioned before, I was most familiar with water quality, probably unfortunately for Robert and Erica, because I was really looking over their shoulder and what was going on in the program areas. But no, we're all new in this together and we all have a very similar mindset. So I'm just very actively involved in water quality. But I looked at the timeframes and the backlog and how long it was taking to get permits out. And I can tell y'all, you know, in front of my staff here as well, that when I looked at the trend, I wasn't too pleased. Because, and I know since last March, we have been in a different posture because of COVID. And I know COVID is partially to blame because, you know, just like every other industry, we kind of had our world turned upside down, and then we had to adjust to working from home, and, you know, and the efficiency measures that were being adopted at that time kind of went on hold. Well, we've been looking at it again, I can tell you, and I've been in this program a little over a year now, and from day one, I started talking about timeframes. And I will tell you, staff has, they've done a tremendous job of responding to this. And over the last 2 quarters, we have issued a record number of permit applications in a very short amount of time. And, we're going to continue with that trend. Next step, we're going to take a little bit deeper dive, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. As I said, we're evaluating every step in the process and tools that we can implement to get there. And I'm going to talk about a few of those. So one of the first things, and these are not necessarily in any order, but that I've worked on before and I'm trying to implement in water quality, and that's mandatory pre-application meetings for all new and major amendment applications. And the concept behind that is, if it's a new or a major amendment application, I'm wanting to encourage all applicants, the consultant, to come in and sit down with our staff and talk through the application, whether that be the administrative portion of the application or the technical. I just want to have a sit down meeting and go through some of the common areas where we see deficiencies and just talk through it. Because if we can eliminate those deficiencies from happening, that cuts out the back and forth that we have to experience with the applicant. So, that's on new and major amendments. Renewal applications, we're not necessarily doing it on that, just because of the volume that we would have to review. And the thinking on renewals is they've already been through the process, so there's not as much to review anyway, so that will cut down on some of those meetings. Another thing that we're implementing is requesting that all applications be submitted electronically. By doing that, that saves a tremendous amount of time. And like I said, we adapted to a lot of these things when we started working from home with COVID, and that's just become a way of life. Electronic applications can really save a lot of time, because multiple staff that will be reviewing these applications can review it simultaneously, and that saves a tremendous amount of time. So let's see, some of the other things we're planning on doing is request information provided in the technical portion of the application is complete and accurate at the time of submittal. We dealt with this in waste permits. A lot of times applicant would submit an application that was, I'll say, for lack of better words, half-baked. In other words, the administrative information was there, but some of the technical portion of the application was missing or incomplete, and the applicant knowingly filed it that way. Well, we're going to look at those applications and do a pre-screening on them, and a recommendation will more than likely be made to return an application that's not ready to be reviewed. And the reason and the thinking behind that is, I talked about at the very beginning, our efficiencies, and, being a state agency, we're at the mercy of the legislature. We have very limited resources. And I know y'all can all relate to what I'm saying, and it's getting very difficult to actually hire resources right now. I guess something has happened after COVID. We're having a difficult time getting additional full-time employees. And I've told Robert and Erica, I said, there's not going to be a magic wand waved and you're not going to get 15 additional FTEs unless some sort of new program is created. But I don't see it happening. And I've always, my motto from day one, and I know they're all sick of hearing me say this, is we need to figure out a way to work smarter and not harder, because the volume of work is not going to change. As a matter of fact, the volume of work is going up over the years. And we're seeing a trend this year with that same increase in the number of applications. Therefore, we're taking a very strong stance here that, we're only going to review applications that are ready to be reviewed. And not to offend anyone, but we don't want the agency to become a parking lot for an application that we have a pending application on file, because we're evaluated on that. We have legislative budget board recommendations and everything else that we're reviewed based on that. So that's a position we're taking. You know, another thing, requests, oh, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit. Notice of deficiencies, we're going to start sending notice of deficiencies electronically. And y'all have probably seen the different posture with your technical reviewers and your administrative reviewers. I've said, hey, if there's 1 or 2 items missing on an application and we're looking at it, pick up the phone and call the applicant or the consultant and just say, hey, can you fill in the blank on this? Can you give me this information and can I expect it by 3 o'clock today? And just boom, a simple email will suffice. Same thing with picking up the phone. You know, I'm wanting to change the process of sending a 30-day notice of deficiency and then allowing, you know, additional time for that response to be sent in. You know, if we can cut out the mail, US mail time and just notify the applicant immediately and kind of on demand as we're going, you know, that creates a tremendous amount of efficiency right there. The other thing I'm doing, see, we're reducing the internal timelines for staff review of these applications. As I said, when I was in waste, I came up with the goal of cutting that time frame in half. We're putting some pretty aggressive standards in place in water quality as well, and y'all will be seeing those over the upcoming months. But in all fairness, I told staff that, you know, yes, my expectations of you are to review these applications in a timely manner and as efficient and timely manner as possible. But in all fairness, I'm going to expect the same thing from the applicant, because I'm not going to hold them to a standard that the applicant is not capable of meeting. So it's going to work both ways. I'm holding them accountable for meeting the timeline. So therefore, I'm expecting applicants to provide us good quality applications that they can review in order to be successful with those timeline reviews. So it's kind of work both ways. You know, I talked about me being very hands-on and in the program area. You know, one of the things that I've started doing, and we've had a couple of consultants that I had requested staff call in for a meeting with me personally, because I want to have a conversation about these applications. And I have also talked to a couple of applicants and said, look, here's the problem with your application. You know, I'm going to ask that you kindly withdraw that application and ensure that it's complete and then resubmit it. And we will make sure that application is issued in a reasonable time frame. So some of that is occurring as well. One of the other things we're doing, so I challenged staff. I said, you know, if some of you engineers that work for me, staff level engineers and professionals that we have, could not take that application and complete it front to back successfully with minimal number of notice of deficiencies, then to me, something is wrong with that process. So the other thing we're going to be doing is revamping the permitting process. And I know this has been in place for many, many years. It was almost 30 years since I was in water quality, and I know not much has changed with what we look at, you know. So we're starting to evolve with forms and checklists where possible. We're going to do a lot of electronic forms and checklists, making the process easier. Where we can, we're going to ask questions and have just a simple questionnaire for the consultant to fill out, or the applicant. The other thing we're going to do is provide assistance with completing applications. And I'm not saying we're going to fill out an application for you. I don't want that to be misinterpreted, but we're going to provide training wherever possible. I know we haven't had a trade fair in a few years, but you know, at some point we'll get back to having venues where we can provide training. And I know we get invited to a lot of workshops and seminars, so we're going to take every advantage possible of those when asked to provide training on basics of an application. And then another possibility is providing YouTube videos and how-tos on permitting. Couple other things: more diligent about timelines to receive notices of deficiencies and publish notices in the newspaper. So one of the other things I've got my assistant, Kevin McCullough, if y'all don't know him. He's an attorney by trade, and he's been working for me since day one, but he's on these stakeholder meetings that we're having internally. And I've asked him to jot down and explore everywhere where the items that we could look at potentially legislative changes. And I know notices are one of those things. And I know that's a very sensitive issue because we have to answer the feds on that as well, you know, with EPA and on these different issues. And but there again, I'm wanting to see if we can do something about the notice process. You know, I personally don't read the newspaper anymore. You know, since we've kind of evolved in the computer age, you know, I look at everything online pretty much. I don't know how much newspapers get read. I'm sure in a lot of smaller communities, that's still an important way of communication, but I'm wanting us to at least explore some options there. So, and then again, of course, publishing those applications, we're going to be following up on those as well to make sure they're published timely, because I don't want to get all the way through the process and then wait 2 months for the applicant to publish notice on these things. And then lastly is being more diligent about enforcing requirements to submit renewal applications 180 days before expiration. You know, I think in the past we've been a little lax on that, but you know, these renewals, you know, these permits are for 5 years in most cases, and you know, applicants should be aware of that renewal deadline and plan accordingly. So we're going to be paying pretty close attention to that. Y'all, and at this point, I mean, I will kind of shut up and let y'all ask me any questions you may have. And the other thing I want to do is I'm going to provide my email address and my direct phone number in the chat. If any of y'all have any comments or suggestions or want to come in and meet with me, I will be glad to do that and explain where we're coming from here. If there's some questions you have that you just don't want to ask in a public forum. So that is really all I had for today's presentation. Did anyone have any questions? Okay. I don't see any hands going up or microphones. So Greg, I guess I will pass it on to you for the next presenter, and I'm going to hang out for a while if you don't mind.
Great, thank you, Earl. Appreciate it. Next up, we have a couple of updates from Robert Sadler.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon. My name is Robert Sadler, Deputy Director of the Water Quality Division in TCEQ's Office of Water. At our last Water Quality Advisory Work Group meeting, I discussed some of the ways that we were working to improve the work that we conduct and the outcomes for our customers. You just heard from the Director of Office of Water, my boss, about our streamlining and efficiency initiatives. Today, I'll be further covering the topics of electronic application submittal and pre-application meetings, which are two efforts we anticipate will support those initiatives that Earl spoke about. So on August 1st, 2021, we began accepting electronic copies of applications via File Transfer Protocol, or FTP. Electronic copies of applications may be submitted via FTP to WQAWG at tceq.texas.gov. If you haven't already used TCEQ's FTP site or submitted an electronic application, you can find information on submitting electronic copies and an associated FAQ on our wastewater permitting webpage at tceq.texas.gov/permitting/wastewater. I think it's the very first item. Unfortunately, thus far, we have not achieved a high level of buy-in from applicants on the submittal of electronic copies of applications. I'm asking those of you in the regulated community who prepare wastewater permit applications to start exercising this option. Submitting electronic copies of applications benefits both the regulated community and the agency. So when an application makes its way through the Water Quality Division's permitting process, it makes several stops on its road to issuance or another decision, denial, withdrawal, etc. Multiple administrative and technical staff conduct reviews of the application and share information. Electronic copies of applications facilitates concurrent reviews by the different teams that touch an application during that journey to a decision. Electronic copies also allow staff to review material efficiently, whether they're working in office or remote. Additionally, electronic copies relieve the need to move physical files around and mitigate the risk of misplacing physical files. It should be noted, however, TCEQ rules require the submittal of physical applications, so our request for electronic copies of applications is in addition to the physical copies required by rule. We do intend to explore options beyond FTP for applications to submit, or the option to submit electronic applications. In the meantime, I am appealing to all of you in the regulated community to utilize the options that we have available now to help support our efforts to reduce permitting timeframes for your projects. Soon, we plan to send another email out to stakeholders requesting electronic copies of applications, and that email will direct stakeholders to the instructions on electronic submission. So next, I want to talk about one of the things that Earl touched on. He mentioned mandatory pre-application meetings for new and major permit actions. So as Earl said, and as I'm sure many of you are aware of, the quality of applications received by the Water Quality Division is one of the primary factors contributing to permitting timeframes. Applications that don't meet administrative or technical requirements result in administrative or technical notices of deficiency. Challenges encountered during the technical review can pause or delay permitting action for weeks or even months as the division and applicants or their consultants work to address technical issues. As we in the Water Quality Division work to improve our processes, identify efficiencies, and improve our timeframes, it is critical that applications that we receive are complete, accurate, and comply with all rules and guidance. To support a smoother, more efficient permitting process, we are requesting pre-application meetings for all new and major amendment permit applications. These pre-application meetings allow us to discuss your project or review an early draft of an application. Water Quality Division staff can provide administrative or technical guidance and identify application deficiencies or technical challenges prior to the formal submittal of an application. These meetings provide an opportunity for the division and applicants to work together outside of the formal permitting process to ensure that applications are submitted in the best possible condition. Higher quality applications are less likely to result in notices of deficiency or the need for significant technical changes during the technical review, and this should result in permits being issued faster. So I strongly encourage, and we are requesting, that all applicants submitting new or major amendments contact TCEQ and schedule a pre-application meeting prior to submitting a permit application. When you are ready to discuss your project or allow permitting staff to look at your draft application, there are a few ways you can schedule the meeting. If you know which permitting team will be reviewing the application, or you have a contact you already speak to regularly, feel free to reach out to that team or to that contact if you're familiar with one. If you're not sure where to start, please contact the Water Quality Division main line at 512-239-4671 or send an email to wqap@tceq.texas.gov and request a pre-application meeting. We will need some information about the project or the type of application to ensure the appropriate staff attend the meeting. So that concludes my update. I know it was brief. I thank you for your time, and I'll do my best to answer any questions you may have later in this stakeholder meeting. Back to you, Greg.
Thank you very much, Robert. Next up, we have a set of permitting program specific updates to go through, and we're going to start those off with Mike Lindner. I think you're on mute, Mike.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Lindner, Team Leader, Industrial Wastewater Permits, and I'm here to give you an update on the 2 general permits that we are developing for discharges from oil and gas exploration activities. And so first, before I actually do that, I'll kind of give you the context, a little background. I know a lot of you probably heard already, but I assume you slept since then, so I just kind of want to give you the big picture before I get into a little bit of detail. So it was in 2018 that House Bill 2771 required the transfer of permitting for oil and gas discharges to the TCEQ from the Railroad Commission. And it also required the TCEQ to apply to the EPA for delegation of the NPDES program for discharges. And excuse me. And so TCEQ was actually required to apply to EPA for delegation this past September of this year, just a month ago, but we actually applied 11 months ahead of time. And then we actually got delegation on January 15th, which was several months ahead of when we were supposed to even apply for delegation. So we're well ahead of schedule, is the good news. And so what this boils down to is that in the majority of cases where previously oil and gas exploration discharges needed 2 permits, one from the Railroad Commission and one from EPA, now they will only need 1 permit from the TCEQ. And there is one exception to that, which I'll get into a little bit later. But so as part of this, we're developing 2 general permits. One under, what's now the TPDS program as opposed to the NPDES program, and another that's going to be a state-only permit. So the first one, the TPDS one, will replace 2 EPA general permits, one which was for discharges from onshore stripper wells and coastal facilities, and the other one which was for discharges to territorial seas, which those are, that's the Gulf of Mexico within 3 miles of the coastline. So, and then it would also replace, this TPDS general permit that we're developing. It would also replace any Railroad Commission individual permit that you would be required to get in addition to the EPA permit. So the second general permit that we're developing it's a state-only permit, and it will replace the permit that you used to have to get from the Railroad Commission for discharges over the Outer Continental Shelf, which is between 3 and 10.2 miles from the coastline. And so in that case, you also still have to get an NPDES permit from EPA because we did not get delegation, nor were we required to seek delegation to EPA for that. So I don't even think that's a possibility, honestly, now that I think of it. But in any event, so that this general permit will replace the existing EPA general permit under NPDES for discharges over the Outer Continental Shelf, and then for any discharges beyond 10.2 miles beyond the Outer Continental Shelf, you will just need an NPDES permit from EPA because TCEQ does not have authority beyond 10.2 miles. Okay, and then lastly, as a note on context, Texas land application permits, such as evaporation ponds or irrigation, those did not transfer over from the Railroad Commission, so those stayed with the Railroad Commission, and what transferred over to us are just authorizations for discharges. So that's the kind of the context, and now moving on to actual updates about the general permits themselves. So since our last meeting, we've made a lot of progress on both of the general permits. We've primarily been focusing on the TPDS general permit, and by doing that, we're actually addressing a lot of issues that would, essentially will be the same for the state-only general permit. And so we're kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. But so we've, a few of the things that we've done is we conducted our own core mix dilution modeling to assess the impacts of individual toxics. You have to keep in mind that for us, these general permits are totally new subject matter for us, really. I mean, any general permits we developed in the past have been for facilities that we already used to regulating through individual permits. So we were familiar with the industries, we were familiar with the types of wastewaters and the types of pollutants associated with those wastewaters. But oil and gas, it's new to us, so we're having to kind of start from scratch. Because of course we weren't just gonna, take EPA's general permits and slap our name on them. So, we've done, like I mentioned, the core mix dilution modeling, and I'm not going to get too much into detail, but that can get very complex. It, depending on the diameter of the pipe you're discharging through, the depth to the seafloor, the flow. If you alter any one of those three factors, for instance, it can result in different limits that we might put in the general permit. So we've been working on that. We've also been doing complex modeling to evaluate the impacts to dissolved oxygen of discharges from oil and gas facilities, and also the thermal impacts. In other words, the temperature of the discharges and how those will impact water quality. Similarly, there are certain pollutants in produced water discharges that we do not have water quality standards for. So we've been working on, okay, how are we going to regulate those in the general permit? And then lastly, there are some metals criteria in Chapter 319, and we've been working on figuring out, okay, what limits from there are appropriate to include in the permit. So that's about all the detail I'll get into on, specifics of as far as what we've been doing, working on those permits. And then as far as anticipated timelines go for actually issuing those permits, by the end of this calendar year, we expect to be able to finalize the draft of the TPDS general permit and submit that permit to EPA for EPA's 90-day review. Then our plan is, while EPA is reviewing that TPDS general permit, we're going to go ahead and finish the draft of the state-only general permit for the Outer Continental Shelf. And then when EPA gets us their comments, if any, we'll address those. And then the two draft general permits will follow a basically, exact same parallel path for public notice and going through the process of actually getting issued, having to go to agenda and all that, our commissioner's agenda. So then basically, once we, put out the general permits for public comment and we receive those comments, we're going to have to work on responding to all of those. So depending on how voluminous those are, we anticipate that hopefully by summer next year, we will be getting, finished with the final drafts of the permits and getting them set on the commissioner's agenda for issuance. So I'll be looking forward to any questions y'all have in the in the meeting, and looking forward to answering them later. Thanks very much for your attention, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks so much, Mike. Appreciate that. Next up, we're going to have a Homeland Security update with Paul Broshai.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Broshai. I'm an engineer with the Water Quality Division Plans and Specs Technical Review Team, and I will be talking about the Homeland Security update that is performed yearly. The existing Homeland Security database, which is an MS Access database with an MS Access application, has become obsolete. The 2021 annual update is the last year that of data that will be entered into the current system. Over the past 2 years, TCEQ has been going through development sessions and has developed a new system called the Water Quality Emergency Preparedness System, or WQEPS. It has been developed, proceeded through user acceptance testing, has been moved into production. An initial data migration of existing data from the MS Access database was performed in late July. Since then, and some of the updates that we have received, which came in after that initial migration, we have entered in both the MS Access system and the Emergency Preparedness system. The Access system will be maintained as an archived version on our system. The MS Access system is not one that was maintainable or even maintained by our Information Resources Department. It was an in-house system and very time-consuming to do any type of maintenance. The new system, the WQEPS, is one that is built on an Oracle backend with graphical user interfaces to enter data. It is designed to allow regulated entities to perform the entry themselves. In the current system, we populate a Excel table of data or forms and mail them out or email them out to entities. They come back and we would enter them into the database. But with this new system, like I said, it's developed so that the regulated entities can enter their own data and update it themselves without having to mail submittals back to us and have us do it. The WQEPS is built as a module on the current State of Texas Electronic Environmental Reporting System, or STEERS. So it's a STEERS module. In order to have access to the account data in STEERS, entities will have to submit a STEERS participation agreement, or SPA, and obtain a ER account and a password. The look of the interface will be similar to that of kind of air permits, if you're familiar with it, or of the aggregates portion of the Water Quality Division. The initial use of WQEPS will be for the 2022 annual Homeland Security update. For permits that have been recently issued or that have never submitted data to us through Homeland Security, the site level data will be populated from the Permit and Registration Information System, or PARIS database, and it will be loaded into WQEPS and allow us to do the initial mail out. The way the system will work is, and how the annual update will work, is that TCEQ will send out the request for the annual information facility and contact information updates. And it will, the request will either contain the key for getting into the account, because every account will have its own key and they will be generated differently every year. So every year there will be a new key for each regulated entity. Like I said, the key will either be sent to the regulated entities, or they will need to call and get the key from us so that they can perform the annual update. You know, regulated entities will use their ER account. They will obtain through the STEERS participation agreement and their password. They will enter the key for the specific site, because each site will have its own entry key. They will enter the key in order to obtain the data, to see the data that needs to be updated. That'll be probably set and associated with their water quality permit. Once you enter the key, the system, like I said, will populate and the existing data migrated from the old system or from PARIS. Users will update the contact and site information for the current year as needed and then submit it. What we are currently performing is we know that there will be growing pains with this new system, and we are in the development of user manuals and working on an outreach calendar to produce some demonstrations of the new system and how it works, so that you can so that users can see the look and feel of it. There's a good possibility that we will have active system demonstrations online We are trying to have one at Texas Water in early April, and possibly the Reuse Water Conference in the mid to late March, and even at the TCEQ Trade Fair if it occurs this coming year. Another possibility that has been thrown out, which Earl mentioned earlier, is the use of YouTube videos. We are possibly looking at developing a YouTube video of how to use the new system. We will be posting updates to our processes and where they are, where we are in the process and demonstrations. We will also return back to the Water Quality Advisory Workgroup meetings at the future meetings and give updates as to where we are. So as far as that goes, that's about all I have on the Homeland Security update. Greg, back to you.
Thank you, Paul. And before I turn it over to the next presenter, I just want to remind folks about the question and answer approach here. Continue to type in your questions into the Q&A box as they come to you, and we'll get to them after the last presentation is given. But also want to remind you, when you do type in your question, if you could please indicate the name of the person that you want to address the question to. I'm sorry, if you know who that would be. So thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca Villalba for a House Bill 7 implementation update. Rebecca.
Thank you, Greg. I will end this portion of the updates with House Bill 7 implementation. So some of you might be aware that the 87th legislative session just earlier this year had a couple special sessions. During the second special session, House Bill 7 was introduced and it was enrolled and finalized. So we have House Bill 7 that prohibits TCEQ from issuing a Tpds permit for the construction or operation of a facility that is licensed for the storage of high-level radioactive waste by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The bill became effective as soon as it was signed by everybody on September 9th of this year. This specifically is not just for the construction general permit. This is for any Tpds permit related to construction or operation of a facility. So that's key to this bill. So currently, we are working on how to best proceed with immediate implementation of this House bill since it's effective immediately. Right now, we are currently screening all applications that are being received through the construction general permit via e-permits to make sure that if we see any of those, we go ahead and address it. But in the meantime, we're working on addressing this through our doing the prohibition for our upcoming construction general permit renewal, as well as other applications that we might have in-house that we need to revise. So just know that this is something that we need to start working on addressing immediately. So we just wanted to give you that update for this bill that popped out surprisingly at the last minute during this special session that happened. So for now, that's all we have to let you know on this. So I will move on to the next portion of our agenda, which is called the general permit updates. And I will go ahead and provide the first few updates under the stormwater program. So the first one is regarding the construction general permit. And for that permit, in case you're not familiar with it, it regulates the stormwater discharges from construction activities. The current permit expires on March of 2023. However, the current permit, we don't authorize certain construction activities that are associated with exploration, development, or production of oil and gas or other things. So as you heard Mike speak earlier about House Bill 2771, it affected also our stormwater permits. So we started with the amendment of the construction general permit. And so right now we are towards the end of that process of amending the construction general permit to address the new delegation of state and federal regulatory authority to TCEQ for stormwater discharges related to oil and gas. So we started the permit amendment with our renewal, so we're not going to extend the renewal deadline. March 2023 stays on the record. We're just doing an interim amendment to address this new delegation that we have. So we're going to expand the applicability for non-exempt oil and gas construction activities in response to this transfer of state and federal regulatory authority to TCEQ for the discharges that are associated with crude oil and natural gas exploration, development, and production facilities. So the purpose of the amendment is, like I said, to bring in that language so that entities can apply under our general permit. And it's going to replace the EPA issued NPDES permit that is TXR 10F as in Frank 000. So that's the permit that they have for us specifically in Texas under the NPDES construction general permit. That was effective in 2017 and it expires February 16th of 2022, so just in a few months. So that's why we started the amendment really quickly earlier this year so that we could have a permit issued prior to EPA's permit expiring on February 16, so that those entities that are currently regulated by the permit issued by EPA will have a permit to transfer over so they can have continued permit coverage. So again, please note that this permit amendment is not going to be extending the renewal period, and it's only going to impact those entities that are currently regulated under EPA's NPDES permit that they're going to be moving over to us. So if they need to continue construction coverage, permit coverage, then they need to apply to our new and amended permit when we get that issued. So existing construction activities for oil and gas that are regulated by EPA continue to do what the EPA permit requires, continue to implement that. Once the permit gets issued by us, the amendment, then those entities need to submit an application to us to obtain permit coverage under our TCEQ Tpds issued permit. So this amendment is not going to affect the entities that are currently regulated by our 2018 construction general permit. Those continue until the permit renewal. Then that's when they have to abide by the new requirements or whatever we have in the renewed permit, as well as submit a renewal application. So again, I want to stress that a couple of times that this construction general permit amendment is really to bring in those entities that are regulated right now under EPA's permit, as well as any new entities that are regarding this oil and gas activities now that we have the authority. So the permit was sent to EPA early in April for the review, and we worked with them on a couple of objections. And finally, on August 9th, we received approval from EPA to move forward with the amendment. The proposed permit and fact sheet were published in the Texas Register and in the Houston Chronicle newspaper on September 24th, which then started the 30-day comment period. The comment period ended just yesterday, which is October 25th. So far, we have received about 3 comments so far, but of course, our chief clerk's office is probably still processing them. Of course, waiting for them to come in the mail. If somebody submitted a comment via email or snail mail, we have to wait for that. So by the end of this week, we hope to know exactly how many comments were received. But so far, we have been forwarded 3 comments. Again, this is to expand the applicability to bring in that universe that now we have authority for regarding oil and gas. Then when the permit gets issued, we're hoping that once we receive the comments, we will revise it if needed. To address the comments, we will prepare a response to comments document. We will go through the briefings again through management. And right now we are hoping to go to Commissioner's agenda for adoption at the end of January. So the end of January, we will go to Commissioner's agenda, and we hope that the permit will get issued and signed to be effective shortly thereafter. So we're looking at something around January 28, 29, around there, having an amended permit so that entities can start applying before EPA's permit expires on February 16th. So that's the goal, that we're trying to get a permit issued before February 16th. And at that time, entities will have 90 days to submit their application to us. So entities potentially affected by this action include operators of oil and gas exploration, production, processing, or treatment operations, or transmission facilities, and associated construction activities at oil and gas sites that are generally defined by a few SIC codes or NICS codes, such as 211, 48611, 48621, 213112. EPA has a really great website with exempt oil and gas activities. Remember, we're only going to cover those non-exempt oil and gas activities. So those that are exempt are pretty well listed on EPA's website. So we recommend that you go to that webpage and understand the differences of exempt and non-exempt. But if you definitely have a question on that, please feel free to send us an email and we'll be happy to respond and guide you and assist you. As Mike said, for us as well in the stormwater program, this is a new world that we're going to be regulating. So we have been trying to also work with EPA to understand, to make sure that we know exactly who needs to be regulated and who doesn't. So definitely thank you, EPA, for helping us understand this and for having such a great website that explains the exempt and non-exempt so we can refer entities to that. So that's the update on the construction zone permit amendment. And now we'll move right into the construction zone permit renewal. As I said, the permit expires on March of 2023. We typically start the renewal process about 18 to 24 months prior to the permit expiring because there are so many steps along the way, including stakeholder involvement. In the stormwater general permits, it's very important that we have stakeholder involvement to ensure that we are listening and addressing things that you all see in the real world when you're out there implementing, enforcing, preparing applications, whatever. We want to hear your input. So we started the renewal process internally earlier this year. In August, September, we started gathering input from internal programs that are affected or or have a part in implementing this general permit within TCEQ. So we reached out to our investigators that do stormwater investigations, to small business overcoming assistance, enforcement, so various other entities in the agency or departments in the agency. We receive their comments as well as we compile comments from everybody that gives us comments through the permitting period that we are implementing a permit, as well as EPA's permit. So EPA right now has a proposed construction zone permit that is not finished yet, but it is proposed. So we are looking at that to see what changes they made, to see if there's anything that we could implement, if it makes sense. But if there's nothing new related to regulations that have come in, then we really have to strike a balance whether we need to implement it or not. So with that in mind, we prepared a preliminary list of changes, and we had a stakeholder meeting just last week on October 21st, and that was our kickoff for everybody. And we had a stakeholder meeting where we presented the preliminary proposed changes. Those preliminary proposed changes are posted on our Stormwater Stakeholders webpage, so feel free to go there and look at those changes. We gave stakeholders, and that includes you, 2 weeks to provide comments or input to us. Those comments are due on November 5th of this year, and you can send those written comments to our Stormwater Technical mailbox at swgp@tcq.texas.gov. So we're receiving comments in the subject line. Please put 2023 CGP renewal. And again, those comments are due November 5th. So that's what we're doing right now in regards to the renewal permit. Once we receive comments, we will continue revising the draft permit, and we hope to send the permit to EPA early next year. The public notice for the permit is not slated to possibly August, September of next year. And then, of course, we will try to go to Commissioner's agenda on February 2023 so that it can be adopted and effective by the renewal expiration date of March of 2023. So please, if you have any questions on that, let us know. You can include them in the chat box and we'll try our best to answer those questions. So the next general permit update is for our stormwater multi-sector general permit. That permit regulates discharges from industrial activities. Currently, the permit expired on August 14, 2021, and we successfully renewed the permit, and it was effective. The renewed permit was effective August 14 of 2021. So that, it was great. And of course, now we are in the renewal period. So right now, entities have 90 days from, from August 14 to renew their existing stormwater authorization under the MSGP. The deadline is November 12th of 2021. We did mail out postcards to everybody that currently had an active authorization with us to remind them of the 90-day renewal period. Some postcards did get returned because unfortunately either businesses closed or we weren't notified that an address changed or something happened. So we are doing our best to figure out what the problem was that caused those postcards to be returned, and we are resending them back, as quickly as we can, so that they arrive by the renewal, prior to the renewal deadline to give notice. But everybody hopefully has read the permit, has read the Texas Register, the newspapers, to know that the permit was issued, as well as we're sending Gov Delivery announcements. We are sending messages in the Advocate newsletter on our web pages. So we're trying our best together with small business or government assistance to spread the word. So, we hope that everybody's reached that needs to be reached, and that everybody that needs to have continued permit coverage applies prior to November 12th of this year for their renewal application. And then later, maybe next year, we will begin the process to expand the applicability for the multi-sector general permit related to oil and gas delegation. So that's something that is not in this renewal permit that we just issued in August. It's going to be something that we're going to be amending the permit at a later date. So that concludes my update. Again, we'll be available for questions. Go ahead and submit them in the chat box. We'll address them. If there's something that we cannot answer right now, we will let you know. Or if you're shy and don't want to submit something right now, feel free to send an email to us at swgp@tcq.texas.gov. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Next up, we're going to have a couple more general permit updates from Preet.
Good afternoon. My name is Jacinto Singh. I'm an environmental permit specialist with Industrial Wastewater Permits team under Water Quality Division. I'm here today to provide updates on two general permits. First, pesticide general permit number TXG 870000 and petroleum bulk storage stations and terminal general permit number TXG 340000. First, I'll start with the updates on the pesticide general permit. On October 26th, the Commission adopted the renewal with amendment of the pesticide general permit, which authorizes the application of pesticides into or over, including near waters of the United States, for the control of mosquito and other insect pests, vegetation and algae pests, animal pests, area-wide pests, and forest canopy pests. Current permittees must submit a renewal application between November 2nd, 2021 and February 1st, 2022. Please note that do not submit your application prior to November 2nd, 2021. Next update is for the petroleum bulk stations and terminals general permit TXG 340000. TCEQ is proposing to renew and amend the petroleum bulk stations and terminal general permit, which authorizes discharges of facility wastewater, contact stormwater, and stormwater associated with industrial activities, into or adjacent to water in the state for petroleum bulk stations and terminals. The current permit expires on October 24th, 2022. Currently, TCEQ is developing the draft permit. The next step after the draft permit is complete is to submit the draft permit to EPA for their review and comments. That's all I have. Thank you very much. And back to you, Greg.
Thank you so much, Jacinto. And for our last general permit update, I'm going to turn it over to Michaela Coleman.
Thank you, Greg. So I'm going to provide an update for us on the renewal of the concrete batch general permit, or TXG 110000. So today, October 26th, the Commission adopted the renewal with amendment of the concrete batch general permit, which authorizes the discharge of wastewater and stormwater associated with industrial activities into or adjacent to water in the state from ready-mix concrete plants, concrete production plants, and their associated facilities, also described by standard industrial classification codes 3271, 3272, and 3273. So now that that has been adopted, the renewal period is starting. So current permittees can submit a renewal application between November 7 and February 5th. So do not submit an application before November 7th if you're an existing permittee. Hold off until November 7th when that renewal period starts, and then you can submit those applications. Since I'm starting the next topic, I'll go ahead and introduce that. We're going to move on to our rule updates. And the first update I have for you is about our sand mining in the San Jacinto River watershed. Just in case there are some new folks listening in, I'll give a little bit of background and then provide the latest updates on this rule project. So in June of 2020, TCEQ received 2 petitions from the Texas Aggregates and Concrete Association and the Lake Houston Area Grassroots Flood Prevention Initiative. Their petitions recommended that TCEQ adopt a new rule to establish best management practices for commercial sand mining facilities in the San Jacinto River watershed, and proposed that this new rule would be a new subchapter within 30 Texas Administrative Code Chapter 311, also known as the Watershed Protection Rules. So in August of 2020, we initiated this rulemaking with stakeholder involvement and proposed the rule in the Texas Register in June of 2021 for a 30-day public comment period. June 25th is whenever we publish it in the Texas Register. And that 30-day comment period ended on July 27th of 2021. And we also held a public hearing on July 22nd on the proposed rule. So since then, we've received comments from stakeholders on the proposed rule. We've worked to make updates to the rule based on some of the comments we received, as well as draft a formal response to all of the comments received. And right now, we are planned to move the final rule to the Commissioner's agenda in November 17 of 2021. So stay tuned for that. Kind of in coordination with the rule, we're also developing a BMP's guidance document. So the rule is going to require sand mining facility operators to implement best management practices that TCEQ establishes in the BMP's guidance document. So we need to have that document ready to go at the time that the rule is established. So while we've been working on the rule, we've also been working on this guidance document to accompany it. And we've done that with the help of stakeholders and our petitioners. So we've prepared this draft guidance document to include BMPs for structural controls, vegetative controls, controls specifically for pre-mining, mining, and post-mining stages of an operation. And we held our final stakeholder meeting on the guidance document July 20th of 2021. and gave stakeholders 30 days to provide comments. So we received comments from our stakeholders and we've been incorporating those into the guidance document. And we're moving forward with our internal publication process so that it'll be an official guidance document available on the TCEQ website at the time that the rule goes to commissioner's agenda. We're hoping to publish a draft version of that document later this month or early November so that it'll be available before the commissioner's agenda meeting on the rule. Next, I'm going to move on to our Chapter 305 Tipties Consolidation Rule Update. During the 2019 quadrennial rule reviews, TCEQ determined that 30 TAC Chapter 308 subchapters C and J were obsolete. Additionally, the ED identified several rules related to the Tipties program that would be more appropriately consolidated with Chapter 305 subchapter P, like Paul. So these rules include 30 TAC chapters 308, 314, and 315, which contain adoption by reference of federal regulations, similar to 30 TAC chapter 305 subchapter P. So this rulemaking proposes that we would repeal chapters 308, 314, and 315 and repropose them within chapter 305 subchapter P, except those obsolete subchapters in chapter 308. So consolidating the rules is going to improve our overall organization of the TCEQ rules that relate to the Tipties program. Lastly, the executive director identified a federal regulation relating to cooling water intake structures at oil and gas facilities, the 40 CFR Part 125 Subpart N, like Nancy, that was not previously adopted. And so this rulemaking is going to adopt this additional federal regulation by reference. And the current status is that on September 22nd, the commission approved publication of and hearing on those proposed rule consolidation. The next steps are that we're hosting a virtual public hearing on November 9th at 10 a.m. If you want to register for that hearing, please send an email to rules@tceq.texas.gov and provide the following information: your name, your affiliation, your email address, your phone number, and whether or not you would like to provide oral comments during the meeting. Instructions for participating in that hearing will be sent out on Monday, November 8th, 2021 to everyone who registers, and the comment period is going to close on November 9th. So one more time, if you want to participate in that public hearing, send an email to rules@tceq.texas.gov, and that meeting is scheduled for November 9th at 10 a.m. Those are the updates I have. Back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Michaela. The next two rule updates are going to be provided by Maria Benitez, and take it away, Maria.
Thank you, Greg. So I'll touch base first on Chapter 321 and 351 obsolete chapters. This rulemaking is being proposed in response to the quadrennial rule reviews, wherein the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality determined that the Chapter 321 subchapters E, F, and L, and Chapter 351 subchapter D were obsolete. Chapter 321 subchapter E regulates discharges from surface coal mining, preparation, and reclamation activities. Subchapter F regulates discharges from the shrimp industry, and subchapter L regulates discharges from motor vehicles cleaning facilities. These subchapters are obsolete because the Memorandum of Agreement between TCEQ and the United States Environmental Protection Agency concerning the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System prohibits TCEQ from issuing authorizations under these subchapters. TCEQ authorizes these discharges under either an either under an individual permit or general permit which comply with all necessary Tipties requirements. Chapter 351, Subchapter D, designates the Rio Grande Valley Pollution Control Authority as a regional wastewater service provider for the Lower Rio Grande Valley regional area. This subchapter is obsolete because the Rio Grande Valley Pollution Control Authority no longer exists, nor are there any wastewater permits issued to any regional system in this regional area. This rulemaking would repeal these obsolete subchapters. Current project status: on September 22nd, the Commission approved publication of and hearing on the proposed rule. And the next steps: a virtual public hearing is scheduled for November 9th at 2 p.m. To register for the hearing, please email rules@tceq.texas.gov and provide the following information: your name, your affiliation, your email address, your phone number, and whether or not you plan to provide oral comments during the hearing. Instructions for participating in the hearing will be sent on Monday, November 8th, 2021, to those who register for the hearing. The comment period closes on November 9th. And moving on to Chapter 7, Aquaculture MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. This rulemaking would implement portions of Senate Bill 703, 87th Legislature, which removed the Texas Department of Agriculture's roles and responsibilities related to the regulation of the aquaculture industry. Previously, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the TDA, and the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department coordinated on regulating the aquaculture industry. This multi-agency coordination was codified in a Memorandum of Understanding in Chapter 7.103. This rulemaking would revise the MOU to remove TDA from this multi-agency coordination and making additional updates to the MOU based on regulatory changes related to the aquaculture industry since the MOU was last adopted. For example, Chapter 321, Subchapter O, which allowed permit by rule and exemptions, was repealed and replaced by the Aquaculture General Permit Number TXG 130000. Current project status: the TCEQ initiated discussions with the TDA and the Texas Parks Wildlife Department and developed the draft rule based on their input. The rule package is currently being reviewed by executive management. Next steps are file backup on October 29th and proposal of agenda on November 17th. And that's all I have for now. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Maria. I appreciate it. And our last rule update and the final presentation for today's meeting will be given by Paul Broshai. Paul?
Thank you, Greg. For the slideshow that will be presented. There it is. As Greg mentioned, I will be talking about the updates to 30 TAC Chapter 217, which is the design criteria for wastewater systems. Next slide, please. As this slide shows, the first consolidated design criteria was issued by the Texas Health Department in September of 1950. Over the years since, the document and the design criteria has been updated and revised many times. The most current revision was finalized on December 4th of 2015. So it's time to update the design criteria again, as there is always new technology and equipment being created for wastewater treatment, which needs to be reflected in the design criteria. Next slide, please. As our timeline, the process, as you can see from our timeline, the process has begun. Last November, we did have an initial kickoff meeting where we laid out what our goals were for the rule update. It was an MS Teams meeting, and then after that, we did receive some comments on items that needed to what people thought would be good to have revised. So we all encompassed them into a memo that was sent up to the commission for our proposed changes. As time has allowed, and we know we're a little behind, but we currently have begun drafts of 3 of the main items requiring updates, and we'll be starting stakeholder meetings in the near future. The goal is to have, as the last update here, the adoption date shows, we're trying to get this done by February of 2023. Next slide. This is a list of some of the main issues that we are looking at updating within this revised 30 TAC 217. Some selections just require editorial changes for clarifications, while some sections there will be some new sections added, and other current areas will be totally enhanced. Next slide. For the emergency power, this is our response, the wastewater system response to Senate Bill 3, which requires, as a result of all the freezing and that over the past year, this is what we will be doing is we're looking to strengthen the rules for backup power for critical treatment units. And as we define critical treatment units, that's dependent on the treatment system being employed, but it usually consists of aeration, disinfection, pumping to keep things moving, and also to avoid no unauthorized discharges. Next slide. For the collection systems, there's always new piping technologies that have come out. We have had a few manufacturers come in and do their show and tell of their systems and what enhancements they've made to some of their piping. So we need to update the rules to encompass those. We also are going to review the force main pressure requirements to see how the current standards meet with what is in the current criteria. For lift stations, we're looking at the active volumes that are allowed so that no sanitary sewer overflows occur, and that is the same with the emergency storage. There's definitely some editorial corrections throughout the collection system subchapter which need to be made, and there is then we're also looking at with some of the other rules that have been adopted through the water quality section, especially those for gray water and that. What we're looking at is telling engineers that they must justify the designs for non-standard subdivisions, like subdivisions that will be using gray water systems because there's a lack of push water, and so that we want to make sure that things flow and maintain flowing and not back up and cause major odor concerns. Next slide, please. We're looking at updating the primary clarifiers section, although we know these are not used extensively throughout a lot of treatment systems. But we want to definitely review the weir loading rates to make sure that what we're reviewing against in 217 is actual and in good standard with best engineering practices. Because when it comes to weir loading rates, they're dependent on whether the clarifier is used for treatment or for solely equalization for other systems throughout the plant. They're also dependent on the size of the clarifier and what treatment is following the primary clarifier. We want to look at the peak flow usage and see that goes back to the equalization. And one of the main concerns we have is that the primary clarifier weirs are getting flooded at some of the rates that have been proposed in what we've been reviewing. We want to look and make sure that our standards are set and they're adequate. And if possibly, we may need to require double weirs throughout our primary clarifiers. Next slide, please. In our aeration basins, we definitely, like I said, best engineering practices, again, want to look to see, do we need to update our loading criteria? There's verbiage corrections that need to be made throughout the aeration basin section. We've had some people petition us to put in certain piping for that will be supplying the air throughout the basin, and then we want to make sure that we're covering all those bases, and we're going to review the diffuser correction factors for the depths of the aeration basins. Lastly, we want to ensure that the equations that we have within 217 are adequate because of higher influent nitrogen and higher influent phosphorus coming into the plants now. Some of the designs that we've been seeing have been using what we consider to be lower numbers, and we need to look and make sure that we're developing systems that will meet some of the permitting standards that are being written. Next slide, please. Sequencing batch reactors and membrane bioreactors. Well, for the sequencing batch reactors, we want to look to possibly, instead, because I know right now it says design for average daily flow. I think we need to design for peak daily flow, and that is what we're possibly looking to update. We want to look at the decanter design using average daily flow versus peak daily flow, see which one we need to do, and we need to look at the basin sizing on the average daily flow versus peak daily flow. For the membrane bioreactor, there's new types of membranes that aren't currently listed in 30 TAC 217, so we need to update those as long as they're accepted, and see, we want to look at peak flow usage on these and see if there's buildup on how best to handle buildup and cleaning of the membranes and the design standards for the membrane units. And we especially are going to concentrate on the flux rates to make sure, and flux rates at both the average daily flow and the peak daily flow, to make sure we're realistic with what we're proposing for the flux rates in 217 against the agency standard and what can be produced. Next slide, please. We are doing a total rewrite of the advanced nutrient removal system. And the reason for this is because permits over the last few years have been getting additional limits for nitrogen and phosphorus. So we're going to take a hard look at what's being requested and how best to do nitrogen removal and phosphorus removal within the system. And we're going to strengthen the design requirements in section 217.63 for the advanced nutrient removals. This is within the activated sludge portion of the 230 TAC 217 design criteria. Next slide, please. The natural systems, which is usually the pond systems that sometimes follow MHOP tanks, etc. We are going to make sure that we align 217.203, which is the natural and treatment systems and ponds. We're going to make sure that they agree with the standards that are set in 30 TAC 309 13D. So, which states that impoundments overlying recharge zones of major or minor aquifers require soil liners of 3 foot thickness, require a 10 to the minus 7 or better permeability, and a minimum of 40 millimeter thickness for any synthetic liners. Also within the natural treatment systems section, we're looking to remove ambiguities and contradictions, because we've been talking with engineers. We get telephone calls from engineers throughout the country, and They were looking at one thing, we were looking at another, and our definitions did not match what we were considering it. They were not calling it that. So we're going to look at removing the contradictions and making sure that we're doing what is right for Texas and make sure it matches throughout the United States. And as we read through the natural treatment system section, we're going to make other updates as needed, which will be determined during review. Next slide, please. We're looking at updating disinfection requirements. We understand that there's been a push lately for, there's newer systems, better systems that have progressed as development would normally happen. But for subchapter K, for the chlorine, we're looking at just reviewing and possibly updating the gaseous chlorine section, sodium hypochlorite, and we may add a section on peracetic acid. For disinfection, one of the issues that we've had with the peracetic acid or PAA is that we have phone calls all the time on people saying, does Texas accept it? At this point, we have not received any data showing that it is a viable option, although we know we have heard that there is some research that has proved that it is a disinfectant, but it's outside of the state of Texas, and we have not, even when we ask for data, we haven't received it. For the UV disinfection requirements, we're looking at updating the UV rules. We're going to look into redundancy requirements. One of the main issues that we've had over the past few years is our regrowth, and it's not regrowth immediately following the UV unit, it's regrowth 20 feet or 15 to 20 feet past after the UV system and exiting the plant. So sometimes it's occurring after the monitoring point, sometimes it's occurring before, or it's mainly after, because we're not seeing a high influx of permit effluent requirement issues. So, and lastly, for the UV, we're looking at upgrading the bioassay requirements. We need to make sure that all the bioassays that we get are adequate for what we're trying to do with it and reviewing it. We need to make sure that everybody's designing using the same type of bioassay requirements. Next slide. Lastly, there will be a new subchapter in the design criteria called subchapter I. And what this is doing is moving the chapter 222 subchapter D requirements into the 30 TAC 217 subchapter I. We're going to be adding treatment and disposal methods to this subchapter that are in line with both state and federal requirements. This is the application and the subsurface, including subsurface drip, pressure dosing, which is going to be an addition, and we're going to be doing low pressure and, like I said, pressure dosing requirements for discharge into the land application. And we're going to be reviewing the existing design criteria for this chapter to see if anything else needs to be updated. I believe that's the last slide I have, and I will turn it back to Greg.
Thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate that. And as I mentioned, that was our final update presentation for this afternoon. So we're now going to shift over to the question and answer portion of the meeting. And still learning some new things with this live meeting platform. And we did put some questions out there that would be visible for y'all to see, and thought some typed in replies we're going to tag along with them, but it looks like they didn't. So I'm going to start out with the questions that are visible to the audience, and if any do not have a typed in response, we'll go ahead and verbally repeat whatever response was given that may not be visible to everyone else. So let's see. we'll start with the question, is there a plan for electronic public notices? And Robert, I believe you provided a response for that question.
I did, and I think Michaela has some more information as well. The Texas Water Code requires public notice to be published in newspapers, so any changes would require legislative intervention, and so no current plans to remove that requirement and shift to electronic notices.
And I guess, go ahead, Michaela.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just add on that the agency is working on making the alternative language notices a little bit more visible. So we're exploring the idea of at least publishing those online, especially in instances where an alternative language newspaper may not be available. So that would only be where alternative language notices are required. So that's something we're looking into. Thanks.
Thank you, Michaela. Next question we have is the pre-application meetings you mentioned. Is that mandatory now or still just potential? And I think, Robert, would you mind taking that one?
Sure. Earl had responded, but he had to leave. Strongly encouraged. You can certainly submit an application without a pre-application meeting, but I think it would serve you or your clients, and certainly us as well if you scheduled a pre-application meeting before you formally submitted your application. I know that it seems like an extra investment of your time up front, but we are fairly certain that it's going to save time throughout the remainder of the permitting process. And so we are strongly encouraging and asking very nicely for everyone to request pre-application meetings for new and major amendment applications.
Great, appreciate it, Robert. Let's see, our next question. Sorry, I'm getting my screen to the right place here. Will wastewater permits be able to be submitted through STEERS or NetDMR at some point in the future? Where are templates available online, and will the physical copy requirement be amended in the future? I'm not sure, Robert, do you know if you or someone else want to take that?
Yeah, that was another one that I think Earl had answered before this question was published. No plans for them to be submitted through STEERS or NetDMR. I would like to explore other options with TCEQ's Information Resources Division, such as ideas like letting applicants publish copies on their own websites. For instance, I know consultants can make copies of applications available on their websites, and then we would go retrieve them from there, or using third-party upload services, of which there are many. But I don't know whether that conflicts with TCEQ's IT policies, and so that's a conversation we'll need to have with the Information Resources Division. But I can't say with certainty there are no plans currently to have them submitted through STEERS or NetDMR. As far as templates being available online, I'm not 100% certain what that is in reference to. I think it might be referring to what Earl described, and those currently are just ideas. Earl had mentioned changing certain portions of the application or developing new application forms or templates to make entry of application content easier for the regulated community. Those are ideas that we're still kicking around, and those have not been implemented yet. So you won't find any templates online currently. The physical copy requirement be amended in the future. Hard to say now. It certainly could be. Right now we have a very low, as I said during my comments, a very low buy-in from the regulated community as far as submitting electronic applications. So until we get to a point where everyone's doing it, I don't think we can consider going through any rule changes. So again, we encourage all of you to submit those electronic copies of applications.
Thank you, Robert. Our next question. So for saltwater disposal wells, which used to fall under the railroad until next year to apply or have a no exposure review. And I'm going to ask Mike if you could take that one or say who might be better able to answer it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was for Rebecca or Michaela maybe, but because I see the no exposure review and I know that's a stormwater term, but what I can tell you, and they're welcome to chime in after me, but if that was meant for me, I will say that so disposal wells are outside of the jurisdiction of the Water Quality Division. So I honestly don't know the answer to your question, and you would have to consult the Railroad Commission and the potentially the underground injection control division of the TCEQ to figure out the answer to that. From my perspective, so again, I'm in industrial wastewater, so I don't know if Rebecca or Michaela, I don't know if that's maybe a stormwater question, but that's my answer from my standpoint. Thank you.
Rebecca, go ahead. I'll answer for the stormwater side. Just based on that name, I don't believe that is an activity regulated in stormwater. We can certainly have a discussion offline if you want to provide a little bit more information about this activity. We can provide more information about whether or not stormwater regulations would apply or if a no exposure certification coverage under our multi-sector general permit is appropriate. So I'm not sure, it's submitted by Anonymous, but Anonymous, if you want to submit that question to the stormwater team at swgp@tceq.texas.gov, we'd be happy to discuss it with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Michaela and Mike. Next question, we have a typed response already provided there. What were the dates in which to renew the pesticide general permit? And the dates are November 2nd, 2021 through February 1st, 2022. And then next question also has a response provided. What will be the process for the public to be able to review water quality permit application documents if all are submitted electronically? And Robert mentioned that no changes are being made to public notice requirements, and TCEQ rules still require physical copies to be provided. We're requesting electronic copies in addition to physical copies to support more efficient reviews. And the next question, I'm not going to read the response to because it's a pretty lengthy one. What amendments are proposed for the petroleum bulk stations and terminals GP TXG 340000? Preet provided a pretty detailed response to that one there in the Q&A box. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to read through that. And of course, with any of these responses, if there are follow-up questions that you have, be sure to type those into the Q&A box. Next question was, are the proposed changes to the permitting processes only applicable to the prescriptive permits or the general permits as well? And Robert replied to that saying the process changes described were related to individual permits. So now I'll switch over to questions that haven't been made visible yet on the audience's side. First one being, will electronic permit application documents be available for public review? I think, Robert, did we already cover that?
I don't think we've covered that. Currently, there aren't any plans to post every application we receive online for public review. I would imagine, I'm going to just speculate that is a long-term agency goal, but it's not something that we are working toward doing in Water Quality Division at the moment.
Thank you, Robert. And let me publish those as we cover them. Next question, if TCEQ is trying to go to electronic submittals, why are hard copies of signatory agreements that are electronically signed required to be printed and mailed in? In that same vein, is there any plan for those facilities that are required per their TPDES permit to submit hard copy quarterly progress reports to OCE have the option to submit electronically? Robert, sorry to look to you again. I don't know if you have something to say there, or if anyone else wants to chime in.
I can take that one, Greg.
Thanks, Michaela.
No problem. So you mentioned delegation of signatories. Those are a big part of stormwater permitting. And if you're familiar with some of the changes we made in our multi-sector general permit renewal, we are moving to have those submitted electronically. So certainly for the stormwater team, and I think the rest of the water quality division, we're moving to electronic submittal of all things that we can as we update permits, renew permits, and where we have systems already established to receive things electronically, that's a little easier. For things submitted to the region, to Office of Compliance and Enforcement, I can't speak to whether or not those are going to move to electronic submittal, but where we can, we're certainly looking to move toward electronic submittal of information. It's easier for you and reduces a lot of paperwork that we have to sort through. So it's a movement we're trying to work toward. Thanks.
Thank you, Michaela. And the last question I'm seeing in our queue here is, what are the current timeframes for reviews on individual permits? And I will ask anyone who wants to chime in there to do so. I'll look first to Robert, but anyone else want to take that? And actually, I'm reminded by a colleague that the answer is 300 days for renewals, or actually 300 days or 330 days, depending on the type of facility submitting the application for individual permits. And I think that's all the questions I'm seeing for now. If anyone has any last minute ones, feel free to type them in. I'm going to go ahead and read some announcements while any of you might be doing that. First off, the next Water Quality Advisory Workgroup meeting is going to be in January, specifically on Thursday, January 20th, 2022 at 1:30 p.m. And just want to make note that that's a Thursday and not the normal Tuesday that we have typically have meetings on. So be sure to mark your calendar for that. And then also, as we normally do after each meeting, we'll post a summary of the meeting as well as a recording of it on our Water Quality Advisory Workgroup website, which should be on your screen right now, at least the URL or address to that website. As far as the meeting recording goes, you can also go to our TCEQ YouTube channel to view those as well. But there's also a link on the Advisory Workgroup website for that. And I believe that's all the announcements I have. I don't see any other questions in the question box, so I think that may be all we have for today's meeting. Just want to thank everyone for your participation and for making this continued stakeholder meeting forum a success and allowing us to submit updates and new information to you. Before I adjourn, I'll just look to my colleagues and make sure no one has anything else to say before we put it in the books. Not seeing any takers, so I believe then we are now going to formally adjourn the meeting. And thanks again for everyone being with us, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Everyone take care. Bye-bye.